Over the last 18 months, we've been working with BigHand to bring them up to speed with the relevant standards for clinical safety, mandated standards like DCB 0129 for all suppliers of software into healthcare communities. And that's quite a long piece of work, evaluating the software, how it's used, looking at all the potential risks and hazards associated with the software, and then documenting everything along the way to create a risk management plan. This is something that then we can share with potential customers and share any risk of implementation of the software. Obviously, the aim of this piece of work is to make it as safe as possible to use, as safe as possible for the patients, and keep the risk of avoidable harm down to the absolute minimum. I think the great thing for BigHand is that they've started down this process and have systematically evaluated their product to ensure it's safe to use as best we can. Inevitably they're implementing software into quite a complex environment. The clinical care environment has lots of variables, it's very unpredictable, and how the software is used can't be controlled. So there's a process then of sharing that risk with the customer organisation. And I think that's the most important thing to come out of this, is that we can work with our customers to ensure they understand how best to use the software and how not to get into trouble using it. So I think the very first thing to do is really to develop a policy that clinical safety is going to be embedded in everything we do. It's right from the beginning of the development cycle, specifying a product, developing it, testing it, and implementation. Coming into it with an established company like BigHand, obviously with multiple deployments already in place, that's quite a challenging task, because you need to go back in time as well and say, okay, what have we learned from previous implementations? What has actually gone wrong? But we've got a log of things that have come in, of issues that have been raised by customers, and we can look at those and say, okay, are they just technical problems, or do they have a real clinical impact? Do they have potential impact on patients? And then map that back to what we understand about how the software is being used, how it's been developed, and so on. There's a big process of documentation associated with that, but we get a real good understanding of potential hazards, and then we can advise customers where to focus and their resource. Going forward, any change in the software, any new development, any new deployment should be reevaluated. Some of that is going to be fairly simple. If you're fixing a bug, in theory, it should make it safer. If you're doing a major deployment in a large teaching hospital, for example, with multiple users, thousands of users potentially, you need to do a much bigger piece of work to understand, is this a clinically safe deployment? Are there any risks? Is there something that's going to turn up that we're not expecting? So it's right through that cycle. And more of the discussion recently has been about how we involve the clinical safety thinking really early on in the development cycle. So thinking about tomorrow's products and next year's and the next decade's products, we need to factor in the clinical safety aspect right from the beginning.